As Kathy mentioned, my name is Sophie. I work at Ethics Systems, like a number of folk here, and we design or we create software for the electronic medical record. And as a designer at Epic, we often get the privilege of working kind of at the forefront of what is coming in our product and software. And if, say, leadership or product leads are working on a given our future vision, we're working alongside them to figure out what research is needed for this vision, how we designed it, and create that visual product that we start to share with whoever might want to see that visual. But I do think that it's tricky to, a lot of these visions are, say, a year or two in advance, and it's hard to see the value in kind of scoping beyond that 5-year period, particularly if, because it seems so tenuous, it's difficult to map out the value from that. And I think speculative design is one method that can help us to do so. So speculative design is kind of the act of looking at that far future. Phil Galactus, who is an advisor in speculative design and who's a number of my ideas shown in the presentation are pulled directly from his research. He defines it as a way to manifest possibilities, to prepare us for inconvenient changes, and to kind of guide paths of our software toward the future. So in other words, it allows us to brainstorm on the many possibilities that our product may have so that we can make more informed decisions today on what might happen in the future. And it does so by pushing us outside of our comfort zones. So to showcase this, I have this lovely future cone. Oftentimes, it's a great name, and it shows it because it's a cone. So oftentimes when we're designing our products, we kind of focus in on a single path, when really if we think about possibilities of the future, as far as we know it, it can branch out into a number of possibilities, and so a cone is a great way to illustrate that. So the smallest area of the cone is what's probably going to happen if we don't make a lot of change. Preferable might be a little bit outside. If we were to kind of look into the future and change our path, we could maybe head in an area that is more preferred for a product. And then there's a huge breadth of what's just possible in general. And so kind of to showcase this, I'd like to look at car keys as an example of a product that we can map along this timeline. So we can probably say that if we haven't already, our keys are starting to do this. You can automatically unlock your car if you're a short distance away from it. It'd also be nice to be able to locate your car keys should you lose them on a long distance run, which I have done and needed to call a locksmith for. But there are also some features that haven't yet been considered that maybe we'd consider it within our preferable realm if we're car key designers. So it could be, we now unlock our car with voice or voice activated. And we can use our car keys to find our car in a parking lot instead of using that kind of annoying alarm that can make other folks jump. And then way out in the possible, we could have a concept maybe of your key becoming more universal. So it's now your passport, your driver's license. Obviously it can contain your credit card. Maybe it has like a lot of additional features to it. And maybe it's a chip that's embedded underneath your skin as opposed to a tangible key that you can lose. So it's getting a little bit more speculative. And if we get even more speculative, maybe the future AI has taken over, so it's a little bit more dystopian, and we need to use lightsabers attached to our car keys to defend us from dark forces. So it's really kind of branching out into wilder ideas the further we get out in time and the further we get out into our home. And although lightsaber car keys probably aren't the concept that's going to win over folks at Toyota, some of these ideas actually aren't so wild. So the universal key concept of a chip underneath your skin, our phones are starting to encompass a lot of that, right? So our form of payment as well as some of our identification are already located within our phones. So what negative implications do we have with sharing kind of this private information to one organization or a multitude of organizations? And so if we were to speculate this, as a company, we can start to think about those implications way ahead of time of this future so that we can head down the correct path now, or at least conduct roadblocks or better designs so that we avoid those unfortunate areas. And so speculative design kind of borders this area right here, what's on the border of preferable and probable, or possible and preferable, so that we can kind of innovate, explore new ideas. And why design on this border? What's the benefit? So as I mentioned, it can help us brainstorm ideas to decide on what the preferable future of our company is, or improve the outlook should we be headed in a direction that's, I guess, not one that our company would want to head down. It forces us to brainstorm a number of ideas that we might not have necessarily considered. And it also allows us to consider the ecosystem around that idea that we suggested. So what the impact of our designs might be, whether it impact positively or negatively things socially, economically, environmentally, whatever that may be. And then as we speculate, it allows us to have discussions around those ideas and bring those discussions back to our team so that our products make more informed decisions way ahead of time. And that allows us to stay flexible. So if you haven't seen it before, speculative design can be kind of tenuous until you see an example. So I'll share one example and then kind of critique it with a couple of speculative design methods so that you can start to see how you might use these tools back at your organizations to predict your futures. That makes sense. So back in 1987, Apple created one of the earliest forms, speculative design as we know it today. It's not this, but this is just to give you a gut on the time period of 1987. This is the first computer to come out with a color display. It's the Macintosh 2, and it was the high end of its time. So at this point in time, Steve Jobs had just stepped down from being CEO of Apple. I think it's John Sculley succeeded Jobs and had pretty much immediately after he succeeded him, needed to make an important keynote speech from which he was asked to give a far future vision of where computers would be able to head. So he took his team and over the next 6 weeks or so leading up to the keynote speech, they needed to plan out what that vision would look like. And for a solid week of that 6 weeks, his whole team researched. So they went to, I think, the MIT Media Lab and Apple Creative Services and Product Design Group. So they looked at ideas that the MIT folks were looking into for technology as far as 1987 went and the directions in which they were heading in. They also pulled ideas from sketches that they had done. I think John created a sketch of a knowledge navigator, which is the idea that could look at a screen and have two controls and sort of navigate through a library. So with that research and with that brainstorming and about 5 extra weeks of just production of this video, they shared this at the keynote speech. And in 1987, this was what they predicted would be the future in 2007, so 30 years later. It's also very 80s, 90s, so I appreciate that. Hang on. So I might need to skip through that. Just gonna pull this guy over. Oh yeah.
You probably have to turn the volume up. I think I turned it off.
Oh, okay. Just like
The keys across the top row there, yeah.
oh, cool. So I can like hear myself.
Yeah.
Okay. I see what you're saying. All right.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father.
Surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock. You need to take Kathy to the airport by 2. You have a lecture at 4:15 on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest.
Right. Let me see the lecture notes from last semester. No, that's not enough. I need to review more recent literature. Pull up all the new articles I haven't read yet.
Journal articles only?
Fine.
Your friend Jill Gilbert has published an article about deforestation in the Amazon and its effects on rainfall in the sub-Sahara. It also covers drought's effect on food production in Africa and increasing imports of food.
Contact Jill.
I'm sorry, she's not available right now. I left a message that you had called.
Okay.
And there's about 5 more minutes of this video, but I'm going to cut it off there. And this was really successful for Apple. They actually ended up creating, I think, a couple more speculative videos off of this because they got such good feedback from their audience. But just in this one video, there were quite a lot of innovations that we've now seen realized today. So there was, I think, the iPad, Skype, Google Search, and I think Siri, who I think looks like Bill Nye. But again, they kind of reaped a lot of benefits from this 1 week-long session of speculation and then the month-long video. And though a lot of sources don't say this specifically, I do think that around that time, the internet had just started becoming to be formed. So it was private, it wasn't public, but I think in looking at the technologies that had started to come about around that time, that might have been one thing that inspired them as well. And so it was that research and also a real drive to change and innovate, I think, the swap in CEOs that really helped Apple be successful with the speculation. And so what did Apple do well? They brought in key stakeholders at the start and allowed them to invest in the product for their far future. And they also did research on the current technology and what might be coming soon. They went to those MIT labs and really did thorough research on where technology might be heading. They sketched their own ideas and they really weren't afraid to invest in this innovation. So the video itself, I'm not sure how this equates with inflation, but the video cost about $60,000 when they were producing it. So they definitely put time and effort and money into that video and reached kind of quite a few rewards. But I do think there were a couple things that Apple might have been able to do better. So one of the key aspects of speculative design could be not just looking at your product, but rather the ecosystem around it, what's going to be changing in the future that could affect how your product should be designed. And so in that video, it was just in the professor's home. He's talking to, I think, what would future be Siri, so I'll just keep calling him Siri. And it doesn't necessarily challenge the fact of what might be happening outside of that home itself. It talks about the professor needing to go to a class later, but really, if all of the students have that tablet, does he really need to leave his home? Maybe all of his communication is just done within the home. And then I think if Apple had thought a little bit more about that, say back in 1987, we would have had interesting conversations around kind of the effects that we're having today where everybody's looking at their phone. There's a lot less face-to-face communication. Or you could have taken a different route and said, maybe the reason the professor has it and the students do not is because this is a pretty expensive device and only those folks that can afford it can really have it. But you can see it's helping the professor out with his career as a whole. He clearly didn't prep with the lecture and he's hunting resources the day of, which we all know that feeling. But in that sense, you can see that there might be a social economical divide where you have this tool that just makes you seem more knowledgeable, you're able to get better jobs, you're able to pay for it as a result. And I think there's also an interesting note along the fact that the professor is kind of looking and finding other resources that he himself has just kind of snagging from. So what's stopping the professor from stealing things that he really shouldn't be? And so just in kind of pausing and considering the impact outside of the professor's home, we can see that we start to run into different ethical dilemmas that might have helped us with some of the problems that we're encountering today had Apple considered them a while ago. And so now that I've shared one speculative example, I'd like to kind of share some other tools that you can use back at your organizations, and I'll do so by acting out a scenario. Say I'm an Apple designer, and our company is now headed in a brand new direction. We have a product that we are fairly certain we want to invest in. It's an idea, it's innovative, and we feel like it's for our future. We've researched it, and it seems like something our users would like. And I think because Apple thinks so much like me, it's a universal car key. It can be your form of payment. It's your form of ID, and it can also unlock your car automatically. It's a chip embedded in your hand. Sounds very familiar. But even the idea alone or a visual could be enough to bring conversation in our organization around, is this ethical? Is this the right direction for our product to head in? Would people be interested in it? But it gives us a pretty rough idea, but doesn't actually dive into when, how, or why not we'd want to do it. And I'd like to see if I can flesh that out a bit more because it's going to drive discussion better. So to do so, we can retrocast. So here's a timeline for Apple products up until 2013. For some reason, I could only find one up until 2013, and then I had to make it further. And for what it's worth, their Knowledge Navigator estimated 2007 for iPad, Siri, Google Search, and all those. And I think they're only like 3 years off from the iPad and those technologies, which is pretty wild. But I'm not showcasing this to say that Apple's really lucky at estimating. I'm going to use it as a tool. So if we look in the past 20 years, we can see that up until about 10 years ago, Apple focused solely on computers. And then from there, they kind of diverged into different products. And sort of the products themselves encompassed all the technologies of a computer, but became smaller, more portable, and more efficient. And this isn't just a technical shift. Using speculative design, it's also important to consider kind of the social changes that have happened in this time. We've gone from rarely, if ever, looking at a computer screen to constantly being engaged in our phones. Also, the way we interact with any sort of user interface has changed really, really dramatically. So we now have, again, whole roles designed around the way that we communicate with our UI. And we've pushed kind of this visual sense. If you look in the past couple of years, we pushed the visual to its limits. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, we've started to, or the whole talk was based around how we veer out into different realms now. So we've kind of hit sound and voice, and our phones have haptics as well too, so the vibrations. So we're not just focusing on graphics or visuals anymore, we're sort of kind of petering outwards. And so these insights in how we've changed socially, as well as how we're interacting with our software, can help me gauge how maybe the next 10 years are going to go. So you can kind of see it's like that exponential growth, and we hit not having computers and we kind of explode out into different products, smaller that are more efficient, and we can expect that to continue. And right at the end, we're starting to kind of end visually interacting with things or really push the limits of that. So maybe it's the next 10 years, we're exploring different senses. We can do kind of a similar thing with phone or with car keys. So up until 2013, nothing technological, there we go. I don't know. But I think in 2016, we started getting a means of interacting with our car. I think BMW, this key right here actually has an interface which you can interact with on the key, which seems like quite a lot, but you're able to monitor your car from a far distance. You're able to turn it on from 1,000 feet away, as well as see if the lights are on and how much gas you have. And then I think Tesla took it a step further and had a phone app. So you could just download this app on your phone. It becomes your car key. You can unlock it or lock it, and it senses whether you're close to your car and have your phone on you, so it'll unlock it automatically. And we can kind of see, even taking a step back, that we've gone from having this key that's tangible and you constantly need to think about where it is, and it's separate from everything else that you interact with, to having it sort of start to become more universal with everything else that you're interacting with, and actually can be placed along the other apps where you have your credit card as well as your personal information. And so we can kind of see that seamlessness might push forward further. So now we go from this to maybe something like, oh, shoot. Another note, even taking this, we might be able to start to predict how folks interact with cars in general. So along with that seamlessness, if I were to take my original key idea, which had these, we could push it a step further to say that maybe our car can help us. So instead of just needing to actively think and interact with our car, maybe it's that our car knows when you want to drive somewhere, it starts pulling up from the parking lot, pulls up to you because we have it embedded on us, and it starts to be able to intelligently know what we'd like. And then you can step into your car, and it knows where you're going as well and automatically drives you there. This kind of pushes things further. And that's where that note of allowing your car to mind read came from. And actually, it might not be that, just looking at the exponential growth, it might not be that it's in the next 20 years or the next 10, it'll probably be in the next 5. So it's something that if we want to consider, we should consider it pretty soon. And we're starting to push toward that more seamless experience. Another tool that we can use from here is backcasting. So backcasting is a form of road mapping in reverse. You can, with these kind of key milestones and some considerations of the ecosystem around them, you can figure out how these events should be points along, or you can kind of backcast. So you hit the next event in the line and move backward to today. And that way you get a better roadmap for where you're headed. So if I were to do it with the universal key, I can see that maybe one step back, we can start to agree on rules and regulations of inserting that chip into or at least underneath human skin. Maybe we design a microchip key to step back and then make a deal either with another car dealership or make an Apple car, could be a step closer. And that's all within that time of 5 years. And so now we have a better gauge as to how we might get to the end goal of a universal key. But I think we can take this a step further and also consider maybe the ecosystem around these steps and the ethical implications. For instance, agreeing on rules and regulations of chip insertion as well as of privacy. I think that right now we're at an age, even if we were to consider those timelines before, back in the computer era, I know my parents were nervous even about putting things in banks. Fast forward 10 years later, we're not so nervous about sharing our information now. And so one kind of ethical standpoint we could take at this point is 5 years from now, folks are probably going to be a lot more liberal and agreeable to, say, putting a microchip underneath their skin. Should this be a direction that we head in, knowing that now it might not necessarily be something that folks consider so soundly later on. That's something we can take into consideration. So now we've started to fill out the how a little bit further. And we have another addition to the why or the why not category. So that's desensitizing the sharing of personal info. And then if we think about even just how to fill out the why not category a bit more, we can start to use this futures wheel that helps us to identify the consequences of a given idea and the butterfly effect it might have from those consequences. So you start with your idea in the center, and you might name a consequence or a result of the idea that has been given within the ecosystem that it sits in. So for a universal key, you might list that loss of privacy is one of our steps. And then maybe with this loss of privacy, we have a sort of monopoly of that private info if one company is using, or if one company has innovated those microchips in particular. And that in itself could lead to issues with, I guess, being able to sell or being able to sell that private info outward. And then maybe we get boycotting our sales because of that, because folks don't really want their information to be sold. So we start to fill out this circle with consequences or results of a given action. And these consequences don't necessarily need to be negative. It can be positive as well. But the idea being that once you fill out the entire circle, you can start to get a better gut as to whether this concept or this design is something that your product would want to head towards or veer away from. And for each consequence, you can kind of iterate on your universal key or your central idea to buffer or improve the consequence depending, if that makes sense. So altogether, I now have a fuller picture of what this concept, this far future concept might start to look like. I can see that it's probably going to be happening very soon if our company wants to head in this direction. And I can start to gauge also the amount of effort and from our company it's going to take underneath the how and the ethical implications underneath the why. And I think this assessment is pretty important if you are going to shoot toward a far future vision concept because some companies don't necessarily think through steps as thoroughly. So I think in March 2018, Uber had, shortly after the release of automatic cars, an automated Uber car struck a pedestrian. The pedestrian at the time was not bicycling. I think they were bicycling. And they weren't doing it through a crosswalk, but automated cars were only designed to detect humans when they're in a crosswalk. And so that was a design decision that happened at some point. Automated cars, well, they were something that had a lot of speculation around them before they were released. So there was thorough thought process around like the considerations, the effects that it might have. But just mapping out kind of the design path that might have happened prior within, I guess, automated car design. It could have been that, I guess we start with our automated car in the center. We consider the option of an accident in a crosswalk, but because we've built those sensors around there being a crosswalk and being able to detect a human around that, we can then say that this could be, it might have been unfortunate, but it would be a bug. We'd fix the fluke in the system. Or the accident outside of the crosswalk kind of has an arbitrary gap around it. So I think Uber needed to take a step back and figure out ways where they could obviously detect people outside of crosswalks after that. And I think that this is an example of a future concept that fell apart a little bit because they probably didn't not consider that people would walk outside of crosswalks, but rather didn't necessarily brainstorm a bit further about the consequences beyond that. And so overall, speculative design can help us to avoid these road bumps, or at least empower us to bring these conversations back to our organizations. So it can also help us to brainstorm on new ideas. It'll help us to map out our futures a little bit more, so organize that mess that is in the futures cone. And so I'd encourage you to not be so afraid of the mess that is the far future, but rather use these tools, bring them back to your organizations, and start conversations about where your product is headed and what the implications of heading in that direction might be.